Welcome back, guys, to World of Tanks with Inferno and Verknechter. And today, before we start with the video, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Basically, I want to do a spreadsheet of World of Tanks tanks. I'm going to explain the reason in a second, but I just want to show you what I would like you to do. So basically, go to your garage. Go to any tank where you've got all the equipment and all the guns and stuff unlocked, and you upgrade them to the highest configuration, to the best configuration, or what is standardly perceived to be the best configuration. You take all of your crew and you put them into the barracks, and you buy a 50% crew. Basically, this isn't going to cost you 1 cent. Right, so just buy 50% crew and so on and so forth. There we go. Nearly there. Beautiful. Now what I want you to do is take all of the equipment away. Also take all of the material away in as far as it boosts your tank in any way. So don't put, food, don't put octane, don't put the large first aid kits and so on. You can leave the small ones, they don't really matter, right? And just leave the ammo as it is, doesn't matter. Don't put any directives on it. And now, if you go to the right side, you'll have these 5 riders, basically. One of them is firepower, or in German Feuerkraft. One of them is survivability, in German Überlebensfähigkeit. One is mobility, or Beweglichkeit. One is concealment, or Tarnung. And one is spotting, or Aufklärung, or Aufklären. And you note these values: 75, 39, 532, 227 and 335 for the M4. Right. And then you go to this Google Docs table. I'm going to put it in the link in the description below. And you type the name, M4 Sherman. And then you note all the values that I've just said. So the firepower was 75. And this is basically what it looks like when you're done. So we've got the Archer, we've got the M4, we've got all the different values, and then we've got the total value. And as you can see, the M4 has a total value of 250 more than the Archer has. And I'm going to talk about that while we're watching the replay. Right, guys, so we're going to watch Verknechter play in his Type 61 on Airfield. And while he's doing that in the background, I'm just going to briefly try and explain my idea and why I would like you to fill out that spreadsheet. Basically, if you look at any given tank, you have a lot of different values. For example, if you just look at the gun, you have a value for penetration, you have a value for alpha damage, you have a value for reload time, and that together gives you the value for the DPM, right? So there are a lot of values that you use to describe one tank. But here's the problem. How can you compare two tanks properly? I mean, gamers like Surfosh and Circumflexes and so on, they try to do that, but it only works to an extent, because which tank is really better? The T95, which has an excellent alpha damage, but basically no mobility, or the Leopard 1, which has obviously lower alpha damage, but has excellent mobility. And I think that the numbers that World of Tanks gives us come in fairly handy here. They're not perfect by any means, but they're fairly good. to describe how good a tank is. So, for example, in the Archer we had a firepower of 93, and it doesn't really tell us anything about any of the individual stats. It only tells us how good they are taken together. And obviously you've got to be... It doesn't take into account HE, and it doesn't take into account HESH, I think. Actually, we'd have to check that out, but I don't think it does. But it gives you an aggregate number of basically the total number of that tank, how good it is in one particular area. So if you compare the Archer against the Sherman, maybe the Archer wins in types of firepower. I think it, like I said, I think it has 93, and I think the Sherman has something lower. But anyway, I think the Archer actually wins. But nobody would ever argue that the Archer is a better tank than the M4, and that is because all the other numbers on the M4 add up to a much higher number than the Archer. Beg pardon. Does that make sense so far? Right. So basically, what I would argue is all tanks of one tier should have roughly comparable total aggregate numbers, however you want to call them. Because only then can you be sure that all the tanks at this one tier are balanced against or towards each other. So for example, we'll just try an easy example. If you have one tank at tier 5 that has a total value of 100, and you have a second tank that has a total value of 1000, obviously the tank with 1000 is going to be incredibly so much more stronger. And we don't want that. We want the tanks to be balanced. So my hypothesis is all the tanks that we now think of as overpowered will actually have higher aggregate values than normal tanks or even underpowered tanks. I think this makes sense. And only if we have these values and then we plot them against, for example, the total win rate, or the total win rate in the last 60 days or something else, only then will we be able to show that some of the tanks are indeed overpowered. And then basically we can tell Wargaming, well look, your numbers notwithstanding, but they're wrong. Do you see where I'm trying to go with this? I'm basically trying to find a way to show how good tanks are if you actually compare them. And then we can set about making all the tanks roughly equal so that there are no overpowered tanks. And this actually leaves one interesting problem, I would argue. For example, I'm willing to bet if you take the KV2 and you put in its numbers, the KV2 will have pretty bad numbers overall because it's not a consistent tank. But here's the thing about the KV2, it's a fun tank to play because you have this incredible derp gun. So obviously, this idea doesn't really take into account troll tanks or fun tanks or derp tanks or that kind of stuff. And that is a whole different problem and something I'll have to figure out. But anyway, I think this is an interesting proposition, right? So, bottom line is, I'd like you to go into your garage and type in the numbers and see what comes out. Right guys, so here's the post-game stats of the game we've been looking at in the background. Basically this was the third mark of excellency for Verknechter's Type 61, which I can tell you took a long time. This was a Mastery class badge. This was a Brothers in Arms because we teamed up with the T95 and a Top Gun. We did over 2,000 damage in support and over 4,500 damage caused directly, which is only the second highest damage in this battle. And we've made a small profit, we made a lot of experience, but basically it means Verknechter's never going to have to touch the Type 61 ever again. Ever. Isn't that great? See you guys on the next one, and I hope you fill out the form. Thanks.